On behalf of the Hutton Public Schools and the Board of Education, I'd like to welcome Dr. David Hutton to our district. Dr. Hutton is currently with the Bay City Public Schools. I would like to take a few minutes to go over the format again. This interview will take approximately 90 minutes. At the end, Dr. Hutton will have an opportunity to make a statement to if he chooses, to the board, and then ask us any questions that you may have that you want answered. The interview is being taped by channel TV 25 and will be aired later this weekend. For those that are in attendance, the feedback forms are on the table on the side, and we do have assessment sites on the web page. With that, I'm going to start the first question to Dr. Hutton. The board's had a chance to look at your resume and become familiar with a little bit of your employment history and background, but could you take a moment to inform the audience on your educational background and your employment history?
Sure. Well, to start way back, I grew up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, and my early days through high school was in the Canadian system, and I think that really helped me when I went to college here, because it was very similar the first 2 years of college to my last year as a senior in high school. Did a lot of writing, and back then we wrote a theme on Friday and got it back on Monday and had to have the corrections in on Tuesday. And needless to say, things are a little different today, mainly because class sizes are a lot larger and there's a lot more responsibility for teachers. Moved to the United States in the early 60s, 62 I think it was. Ended up going to the University of Indianapolis, which back then was Indiana Central College. It was a Methodist college, and ended up getting my bachelor's and my master's degree from that institution. I originally had planned to be a doctor and had worked at Methodist Hospital, became a registered med tech, and did some experiences working with inner city kids, and that kind of whetted my appetite to get into education. So lo and behold, I ended up teaching in Wayne Township, which is on the west side of Indianapolis, for 7 years, and was encouraged by the superintendent to move into administration, and got my EDS and doctorate from Indiana University. Went to Lebanon, Indiana, planned to stay 1 or 2 years to get the experience and move on, and lo and behold, I was there, I guess, almost 24, 25 years, and moved through the ranks, assistant principal, director of curriculum, business manager, assistant superintendent, and finally the superintendent. Left Indiana and decided I wanted to be an urban superintendent. I had always wanted that experience, and Bay City opened, and ended up being there for the last 6 years. And that has been a unique experience in an urban setting. When I was in Lebanon was about the same size as Hazlitt, and it was about 20 miles north of Indianapolis, so very comparable districts. And looking at your test scores and the neat things you're doing with facilities, it reminds me a lot of Lebanon, Indiana. So I'm here today because the fact I saw your advertisement and looked at the Standard & Poor's on the website and talked to a lot of people, and they said this was a great school district, and that's why I'm here today.
Dr. Hutton, I'll ask the next question. Hazlitt prides itself as being a progressive district. Tell us about how you have worked with others to develop new and creative ideas to advance learning opportunities for children.
Okay. I think probably in Indiana it was a little easier to be creative. There just weren't the obstacles. First obstacle I'd say right now in Michigan is the legislature and resources. In Indiana, the legislature was very pro-public education. There was a lot of seed money for grants. I had a teacher by the name of Barb Peterson that was involved in Susan Kovalick's integrated thematic instruction model based on the brain-compatible classroom. And I used to like to go over and visit Barb because she was always doing such unique things, and her classroom had a bathtub in it, and it had a rocking chair, a lot of plants, music and lighting lamps and things like that. So a very inviting environment for kids to learn in. And I remember going in the classroom one day, and Barb was dressed with a scuba outfit with fins and snorkels. They were starting their thematic unit on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. And the whole concept of the ITI model is connecting learning. And you know, when most of us in this room went to school, it was 55 minutes in math, 55 minutes in English, 55 minutes in foreign language. We never connected anything. And the ITI model does connect things, and it really focuses on how kids learn. Well, Barb came to me and said, you know, my kids are really excelling, test scores are improving. You ever think we could get a couple other classrooms going? Well, at that time, I had a principal leave in one of the buildings. And after talking to Barb and doing some research, I felt that we should have a school that was completely an ITI model. And I worked with Susan Kovalik. Susan came in and did some work with us, and I convinced the board and the community that this was a great pilot model. And lo and behold, we were probably the first district that Susan had that it was a K-5 thematic school. And Barb was the first Krista McAuliffe winner for the state of Indiana based on what she had done with the ITI model. And Barb told me this past fall there are now 209 schools in the state of Indiana that are using the ITI model. It's here in Michigan. Barb comes up here regularly. We've done some things in Bay City, but not to the extent I would like. It's a great concept, and I firmly believe that we need to be data-driven and research-based. You know, I've been in this business long enough that I jumped on a lot of bandwagons over the years of things that came down the pike, and I've certainly backed off in the last decade, I guess, that I've been an educator, is that we really need to examine, you know, what makes a program effective, and how kids really learn, and whether test scores are improving, and whether teachers can embrace the concept. You know, you often hear from teachers in districts, and I've been a chair with North Central Association for the last 15 years, and I know the common theme I often hear from teachers is, well, we're doing this program, but once the superintendent or once the principal leaves, then we're not going to do it anymore. It's not effective. And that's too bad to have that mindset in education today. We really need to have good programs that foster and promote good pedagogy in the classroom. So I've always been involved in looking at projects. In Lebanon, we had Ted Sizer's Coalition of Essential Schools and the Relearning. That was very effective, particularly for at-risk youngsters. And again, it was under the concept of connecting learning for high school kids. And after hearing the news this morning on the Casey study that now says that the number of 18 to 24-year-olds that are not employed and not in school is increasing at a phenomenal rate at 19% a year. And if you start running these numbers out, the country could be a problem with regard to the economy if we don't get these youngsters in appropriate programs for the future. And I think it has to start at the elementary level, so that by the time they're walking across the stage for graduation, they're moving on to post-secondary education for career or university.
Dr. Hutton, can you give us some examples in which you've had several things to do at the same time that were of equal importance and how you handled them?
Well, of course, in the last few years in Michigan, it's the budget drawing down, I guess I like to use that term, trying to be fiscally solvent and be a good custodian of the tax dollars, yet at the same time keep all the programs intact and keep employees on the job. During that time in Bay City, we have 9 different bargaining units, and to try and manage budget, to negotiate contracts, keep examining what you're doing curriculum-wise with MEP scores, North Central accreditation. Our plates are pretty full today, and I really believe that you have to be organized as a superintendent today. You've got to also think outside the box, because we as superintendents today aren't the same animal from the last decade. We used to be the sage on the stage, and we knew it all, and a lot of people would accept that. But today we're more of a guide on the side. We're facilitators. We're constantly trying to be creative. We're looking for new ways for money. One of the things I did in Bay City is brought in a grant writer, and Rich has probably paid for his salary 20 times over. I think since I've been there, he's brought in almost $5 million to the district. And though it's soft money, it goes, but it maintains some of our good programs. So there are some things like that. So, you're constantly juggling the balls to try and keep the district solvent, yet the main focus has to be on the quality of instruction in the classroom and closing the learning gap. We have a very high population of at-risk students in Bay City, and that is a concern of mine, that those youngsters do get a quality education, because they're the taxpayers of tomorrow and could be future school board members also.
Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Hutton, can you give us some examples of how your work experiences qualify you for Hazlitt Superintendent?
Well, I think I would bring a unique perspective to this superintendency, in that I've been a superintendent in a district very similar to Hazlitt. The experience of being an urban superintendent with a different type of issues, I think has given me a truly unique experience at seeing how large districts really operate, how they struggle with issues of diversity, finance, collective bargaining through personnel. One of the good things I really feel that I have done is get involved in target-specific bargaining, and I did that in Indiana. It was very successful there. I don't believe in adversarial bargaining, and after my conversation with our union president in Bay City, he doesn't believe in adversarial bargaining anymore either, and he said, "Dave, after you leave," he said, "we're not going back to the old way." So I think I'm creative. I believe in the paradigm shifts. You have to do things differently today. I have a real passion for public education. I certainly am not ready for retirement. I am looking for a superintendency for another 7 to 10 years. I think I have a lot to offer. Both districts I've been in, and I've only been in 2 in my career, I have not jumped around. Both those districts had improved dramatically over my tenure as superintendents in those districts.
Thank you.
Welcome to Hazlitt, Dr. Hutton.
Thank you.
You've mentioned briefly a couple times regarding budget, and so clearly you had to anticipate budget questions in this climate that we're in Michigan. What do you see as a superintendent as being the major goals and objectives when you develop a budget these days?
Well, it used to be, and I was a business manager, you kind of massaged the numbers and you padded a few accounts here and padded a few accounts there, so at the end of the year, you always had a little stash of money just in case things got real bad, and those days are long gone. It's almost to the point where we're down to the gnat's eyebrow on the revenue stream coming in. You really have to justify the programs that you have in a district, and I really believe in cost-benefit analysis. And the days when we'd offer classes to high school seniors with 4 and 5 kids in them, we can't do that anymore. We've got to really justify the effectiveness of those kinds of programs. I really believe that when you formulate a budget today, it becomes a collaborative collegial initiative. I think you meet with your key administrative staff first, then move down to your building level principals, then your department heads, and get input. You have to do that today, because sometimes in the puzzle palace, we're isolated and don't get sometimes all the good information of what's going on in the classroom. And I believe that teachers and people who are in the trenches need to have access to the superintendent and the business officials to make sure they understand what's going on in the classroom and what the needs are. One of my big frustrations, of course, has been facilities in Bay City. We tried to pass a bond, and unfortunately the $74 million project was voted on a couple of days after 9/11, and it went down in flames big time. And of course we did the post-analysis to try and find out what happened, and then basically people said, this country, we don't know what's going to happen. The economy could go south very quickly, and we sure don't want to have our taxes increased, which was logical to me. And I think with budgets, we've got to look at being creative, as I said, utilizing a grant writer to bring in resources, but also educate the staff on how schools are funded. It was amazing to me that when we started the process of our bond and then the reductions the last couple of years, that the majority of our staff don't understand Michigan school finance. They still believe we hide money, that we aren't telling the truth, and we had a series of forms, and we went to all the staff members, all the bargaining units, gave them a mini course in school finance, and we did the same thing with the community. And I think you need to do that. People need to understand. I guess I'm surprised that today parents aren't up in arms on the current state of affairs. I mean, we know that potentially we can lose another $28 a student between July 1st and August 31st, and for me that's $300,000. And we have no extra money. Our fund balance is next to nothing, because we're borrowing on the borrowing in Bay City to make payroll. 87% of our total budget is now salaries, and facilities that are in need of repair and to buy instructional materials and supplies. There's not much wiggle room in order to move forward, and that is very frustrating to me. But I don't think this is going to change in the next several years, and I think we as superintendents have to continue to be more collaborative with our staff, with our community, and also with our legislators. I believe in reaching out to other governmental units. I think we need to be seeking maybe some collaborative initiatives. We've talked about perhaps a common garage for the county and the city and the schools to repair equipment. I've talked to our legislators about what our concerns are, and I'm very fortunate. I've got two great people in our community that really call and ask for my input. I don't know if you know Representative Joe Rivet, but Joe will call and say, Dave, this is on the floor, what do you think? And to me that's rare, because when I meet with other superintendents, that doesn't happen very often. Superintendents find out about what's going on, what they read in the newspaper or hear in the evening news. So budgets are extremely important. Superintendent has to be on top of them all the time.
Just to somewhat follow up on that, if I could,
Sure.
during a period of declining revenue, which a lot of districts are in because of enrollment and other reasons, explain how you would determine or set your priorities to reallocate the resources that remain.
Well, again, it goes back to cost-benefit analysis on what you've got to look at your K-12 curriculum and see what you're offering. And that's what we did when we started, really, the belt tightening. How many programs can we offer? Do we go to a core basic type philosophy in the school district? We used to offer a lot of adult ed, and we found that we were subsidizing adult ed to the tune of $25,000, $30,000 a year, and we couldn't do it anymore. We've cut that out completely. But at the same time, I believe in getting the stakeholders together to see what people think about these issues. We don't ask our employees their opinions enough. And I really believe in the concept of shared decision-making. I think we need to periodically meet and talk about these things. I have a concept in Bay City called Diagonal Slice. And once a month, board members, myself, and some other administrators meet with a cross-section of employee groups, not to talk about collective bargaining or labor relations issues, but talk about issues in the district that can improve the quality of life for kids. And it's been amazing. These meetings have been very, very productive. Some great ideas have come forth about ways of saving money. And probably the biggest thing that came forth was we don't market our schools enough. When you only have 20% of the population that has youngsters in public education today, the other 80 doesn't know what's going on. So we've beefed up our community access station, our cable TV station, tried to put programs on there that were informing the community what we do with curriculum and programs. And that has helped us a lot. So I think marketing, when our custodians and our bus drivers, they're all playing bridge or canasta or down at the Elks Club, they ought to have information that's factual. And unfortunately in our district, the rumor mill is alive and well when things get going, when you talk about budget cuts or collective bargaining agreements. And you got to get those facts out to people, and that's one thing that we've tried to do, and we've been successful at it. It has helped.
Thank you.
Dr. Hutton, you've already mentioned previously your target-specific bargaining, and also you just referenced the fact that rumor mills get started during the collective bargaining process. Sounds like your environment is a little more challenging than what we're used to here in Hazlet. Do you have a specific philosophy, or could you expound upon the target specific bargaining process?
I really started getting involved in this in Indiana. In Lebanon, we played the game, the adversarial game, and I was bargaining at the table with the board reps and with the administrator reps, and then, we'd start 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're still dealing with this stuff at 3 in the morning. And when I look back, this is the way it has been done. And I went through the NEA training in the late '60s. Those guys came in from Washington and said, "Here's how you do it. You wear them down. You wear them down." It just frustrated everybody. I went to I'm not sure if it was AASA or NSBA. And Goldaber's nephew, and Goldaber was big on win-win bargaining in the private sector with GM or Ford. And the nephew was putting on a seminar on target-specific bargaining. So I went and listened to what the guy said. And I thought, this is a nice model we ought to be really pursuing, where the first phase is communications. They come in and spend 5 days training your bargaining team, as well as all board members, on the process. And I convinced the local NEA group to try it, though they said, "Yeah, we'll get involved in this, Dave, but we'll bring our people in to do the training." And I said, "No, this is one thing that I'm going to say no on. We're going to try this outside facilitator who's a real authority on win-win bargaining." And so we started down the road, and 5 days of training together. Then we started pairing up and looking at issues in the school district. And we were in a room like this. And everybody, the board members, administrators, and our teachers were asked to identify problems in the school district. Well, we had butcher paper all around the place, and there were all kinds of stuff up there. And it really amazed me when I'm sitting next to a teacher, and she leans over and says, "I don't know why our people put this stuff up there. It's got nothing to do with kids." And I said, "You want to say that a little louder?" And she did. And there was just dead silence in the room. And that kind of got people thinking, we're trying to work together. There's only X dollars in that pot. And it's no sense creating an environment where people aren't talking to one another. And when I was a classroom teacher, we had a semi-strike, And I was in that building for 3 years, and there were still people in the building that weren't talking to one another because of what happened over labor relations. And to me, that's a tragedy as a professional. And so it was successful. We ended up in Lebanon with a 5-year contract, closed. And it's still going on there today. So when I came to Michigan, I convinced the leadership to look at it. In fact, our facilitator, I don't know if you folks know Maureen K. Powers, her husband Don is a federal mediator. She does training in target-specific bargaining, and Maureen is just phenomenal. Our staff love her, and we're starting to move it. We have the contract through the MEA, and now we're moving with the bus drivers, secretaries, and custodians. Eventually, we'll cover the remaining bargaining units, but we're all moving toward that target-specific. And to me, it's the end of the day. But, you know, whether it's Hazlitt or any other school district, it comes down to a team of people working together toward a common goal. And I think if you can bridge that people really feel that they're listened to. When a management person and a teacher go off and do research on class size, they come back together and they make that report together. So you don't have the we-they issue anymore. I think it's the only way to go.
Thank you.
Dr. Hutton, as superintendent, what do you see as your role in promoting student achievement, and what efforts have you made to ensure that this is a reality in your school district?
Well, today, as far as I'm concerned, the superintendent is the instructional leader. We've got to close the achievement gap. MEP scores, they're not going to go away because people today expect kids to be tested. They like to compare school districts. But I think we need to start examining the process of how we get from point A to point B. You know, we get beaten about the ears pretty good when these MEP scores come out because the media loves to compare one district to another. They don't deal much with demographics. As I said earlier, I have a high at-risk population, yet my neighbor, his kids all are in the upper quartile for MEP scores. And I think we really need to look at how kids learn. I said the ITI model has been one that I've looked at. Literacy model. In Michigan, we have spent a lot of time through staff development, and that's another key. If we're going to improve the quality of instruction in our classrooms, then hand in hand with quality instruction comes good, sound staff development. Not in service where somebody blows in and blows out after 45 minutes. It's got to be a process that's ongoing and sustained, and we've got to put resources in it. And it's no sense trying to do it at 3:30 in the afternoon after teachers have put in a full day and are just tired and expect them to come up with new and innovative ways of teaching in the classroom. So, I mean, test scores are there. They're not going to go away. But I think we need to examine the whole concept of how kids learn and how teachers teach. And research is starting to really help us along those things. Universities, schools of education, I think, are a lot more practical and pragmatic on what's going on in classrooms, and there's more partnering with the universities. We have great partnerships in Bay City with Saginaw Valley and with Delta College. We have young beginning teachers coming over, and actually classrooms are in our facilities, so they get to see the real live world of education, and they get to debrief. They get to interact with our kids and our other staff. And of course, the mentor program is one of our things that I think in public education we're doing a good thing to mentor people. It used to be, when I went through teacher education, I did 6 weeks of student teaching and then got a job, and here it is. I got 30 kids in a biology class, and I was expected to teach them everything about biology and very little mentoring. And I think mentoring needs to be part of improving the quality of education.
Thank you.
Today, technology is playing an increasing role in the schools. Can you give some examples of the appropriate role for technology, or you could talk about potential opportunities for technology to enhance student instruction?
I think technology has become one of the integral tools in instruction today. You know, I've got a class, several classes that the kids all have these things, and POM, and there have been several different grants that have provided these things. Distance learning. We have this going on in the school district. The virtual college. We have kids involved in this. You know, it's almost becoming 24/7. We shouldn't hold youngsters back. And I think our old system and the old paradigm, you know, you had to jump through all the hoops. We had a lot of seat time. We didn't allow the kids that were really ready to move on to do that because they had to be in lockstep with everybody else. Technology has broken down those barriers that kids can be home in the evening and be learning. We had a youngster that finished a course with, I'm not sure if it's Arizona State, one of the southern schools, on Middle East affairs. And he was analyzing the whole issue of the Palestinian culture and just what was causing all this. And I thought this was fascinating to have a junior being involved in that in-depth study. So, I mean, I think we need to encourage the use of technology. You know, with cable TV today, cable in the classroom, you know, we've looked at Channel 1. We need to be cautious on how we use these things. The days where videos were fillers, used to, as a classroom teacher, sometimes we joke and say, well, Friday we're going to have a videotape because I'm kind of tired and we've had a tough week. You've got to make sure that technology is integrated into the curriculum so that it's used appropriately as we educate our kids.
Let me follow up then, just because you talked about that it's integrated and it's appropriate. How do you evaluate whether it's been effective?
Well, we did that. We now have an instrument that we do a post-assessment at the beginning of the year where teachers evaluate a whole list of things. The amount of technology we actually have in the school district, the software we have, and then how it's integrated into the classroom. We give that test at the end of the year and evaluate how effectively it's being used. And we have found over the last 4 years that the percent of utilization, effective utilization, is increasing. Again, through staff development. I mean, we give people this technology, but it's got to be ongoing. You know, it's just like the PC. Everybody has a PC on their desk, but we have a lot of staff members that still are reluctant to get in and explore the uses, you know, databases, spreadsheets, what the internet can do. That has to be ongoing. You can't just say, here's your piece of technology, now use it. It's got to be evaluated. The nice thing about North Central accreditation and our own, you know, state accreditation model, it's evaluating that as part of the process also.
Dr. Hutton, athletics and co-curricular activities are really important for our community and students. Please share with us your philosophy and priorities of both.
Sure. I guess as an educator, it's always been a priority to me to have good quality athletic and co-curricular programs. I had a youngster that was not enamored to academics in high school, but he was a great swimmer and he loved band. At times, I think the swim coach got him through high school because, you know, there was always that carrot up here, Matt, if you're going to swim, you're going to have good grades. And he always did have good grades from the swim coach when he was involved. Today, that's becoming, you know, in fact, here a few months ago, we had a group of people saying that we needed to cut out athletics. And there's where we're going to save a lot of money. But when you look at the number of youngsters that participate, and you folks know that the research is clear on this, normally your kids that are in athletics and in band and co-curricular program are the good kids. They're the kids that are up there excelling. It also encourages some of the other at-risk kids to be involved, and they see the other kids model what they're involved in. So, you know, my priority always has been, if it has to be a cut across the board, then make sure it's fair and equal as you make these cuts. And what we did this last time around is we went to the athletic directors and all the coaches and said, look, you know, you guys know the programs. Is there any fat anywhere? They came up cutting $150,000 out of the K-12 program. That they said it won't hurt the program.
Dr. Hutton, share your experiences with us in working with special needs students.
Well, one of the hats I wore when I first went to Lebanon, Indiana was, well, you're going to be the assistant principal athletic director, and oh, by the way, you're going to be the director of special education for the school district. And that was the time in '74 that 94-142 had just been passed by the federal government. And of course, the interesting thing was Indiana hadn't done anything. So I had called the State Department and said, where can I get information about how to be a director of special education? And they said, well, why don't you go visit Michigan? Because Michigan has the model for special education. And lo and behold, I went to a program up in Grand Rapids that one of the ISDs was putting on way back then. And I was blown away with the things that Michigan was doing with special needs kids. And, you know, everybody started panicking about writing IEPs and, you know, case conferences and all the things that went along that today, you know, that's just standard operating practice for us. And again, you know, 94-142 is an unfunded mandate. I'm sure in this school district you have dollars that are coming out of your general fund to support special needs youngsters and special needs programs. And anytime I'm talking to a legislator, whether when Jim Barsher was in the Senate or in Congress, I was always hitting him up about special needs kids. And in our district, it's almost $2.5 million that comes out of the general fund to support those programs. They're necessary. If these guys and gals in Washington enact this legislation, by gosh, they should be fully funding it to make sure these kids aren't shortchanged. And that's every program, whether it's in the state of Michigan or in Washington. So I have a good handle on special education. I certainly appreciate working with parents, and I meet special ed parents on a regular basis, understand their frustrations, work with them on how to contact legislators and let them know current initiatives that are coming down the pike, how it could affect their children. So they're part of the school family, just like the gifted and talented folks.
Do you have any specific examples of how you have helped to develop alternative methods to deliver services to meet the needs of a special education student?
Well, we're big enough that the ISD takes care of that. You know, they notify the superintendents on a periodic basis the type programs that they're going to initiate. I guess in Indiana, I was a real advocate of mainstreaming. And a lot of resistance when the state passed their law. I saw how successful it was, those youngsters that were included in a full inclusionary model. So probably the inclusion, school-to-work type programs, I was a real strong advocate for. But as far as, you know, special curriculums, adaptive, assistive technology, things like that, I'm on the periphery, but I know those things are very valuable, and I bank on the expertise of my staff to recommend appropriate programs and the technology for those kids.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Dr. Hutton, have you ever been involved in a situation in which you have knowledge of the needs of the students, and you know the capability of the district, and have been able to come up with a good solution to the students' needs.
Probably the best example I can think was when we started in Indiana on Ted Sizer's coalition. We were very cognizant of at-risk kids and having at-risk kids in high school, and whether at-risk kids were going to survive taking Shakespeare, advanced calculus, or calculus. I met with a group of teachers, particularly freshmen, and said, you know, have you guys ever thought of delivering the curriculum a little differently? Because basically the high school principal is the one that certifies the credit. And, you know, we get all hung up on the content area sometime and not the nature of the learner. So in fact, I was very fortunate. At that time, I had about 5 or 6 young teachers that were just so gung-ho on really making it work for those type kids. So they decided on their own, on their prep periods, they would meet and work with these kids. And there were about 14 of these kids. And they decided to adopt from Susan Kovalick's basic tenet, was that they were going to do kind of a thematic approach, and they were going to start connecting the learning. They would merge, I think the one course they had was just communications. They made sure the kids knew how to take a newspaper and look at want ads and, you know, the financial section and just practical things. They went out and found out about apartment rentals. They took them to the bank, open savings accounts. They took them on field trips to the state park where they had to camp out, they had to cook, they had to do these things. And at the end of that year, we had these kids they had to make a presentation to the board about what they had learned over the year. And everybody was blown away. I mean, these kids that were, quote, at-risk kids, some of these youngsters did better presentations than college kids did, about how they valued the interaction with the almost one-on-one with these folks. They became so close. It was amazing. Unfortunately, money started to dry up, and the other issue was these teachers got burned out so quickly because these kids are high maintenance. They don't have anybody at home supporting them. But these teachers did everything for them, so they almost became a family. And our alternative school in Bay City has that type of philosophy right now. It's been very successful. They tell me tonight at our alternative graduation that the numbers have doubled in the last 2.5 years. We have Novanet technology again in that program, but we've got young teachers that are really dedicated to those type kids.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of along the same lines here, could you give us some examples of how you personally have impacted either the knowledge, the skills, or the practices of some of the employees that work for you or with you? So your influence on it?
Well, one would be I recruited a young guy as my technology director. He was making a presentation at Indiana University 4 years ago, and I convinced him to come to Bay City. Salaries are a little different between the two states, so he was thrilled to be able to come here. But this young man will be a superintendent in Michigan or some other state. Very bright, is interested in process and systemic change like I am. I have mentored him since he has been with me. He is now in the doctoral program, I think at CMU. I really believe in staff development. I mean, if we're really going to do good things, continue to do good things in public education, then we need to do the staff development. You know, we keep talking about the cuts, and I know staff members and even board members in community said, well, you know, these professional development days that you guys have, they're a waste of time. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. If you're going to cut, then you cut part of staff development. I mean, it's got to be across the board, but you don't cut out staff development completely. It's too valuable today. People need to be assisted to improve in their profession. There's just not enough hours in the day to get everything done. And the type of youngsters that we're dealing with today are not the same kids even 5 years ago. And that ongoing sustained PD has to be maintained. I have promoted that in the school districts that I have been in. I encourage people to get involved, always. I have encouraged people to get involved in things like our Teacher Leadership Academy that I brought to the ISD in Bay City. It was modeled after the one we had in Lebanon, Indiana. And the Teachers Leadership Academy was not an academy to train teachers to be principals. It was an academy to help develop leadership skills in the classroom and in the building. And unfortunately, because the ISD had to cut, they cut out the Teacher Leadership Academy. We had a Principal Leadership Academy that started, it only lasted 1 year. The one in Indiana is still ongoing, very, very effective. And the feedback and the assessment that we had from people that went through the one in Bay City through the ISD, rating sheets were extremely positive. Felt it was one of the best experiences they were involved in because we brought in national speakers. They had the latest book every month. They got the latest books on education and on business, on leadership, and they would meet and debrief. They all were provided a laptop. We had a website with specific chat capabilities so that all these teachers in the district could communicate on a regular basis and share their experiences. And again, it goes back to kind of the mentor concept. Education, as you know, is an isolationist type profession. You go in and shut the door and do your thing. We don't do enough debriefing on what happens, and I've always encouraged the communication, ongoing communication. We've had at opening day in our district that I facilitated was bringing different grade levels together just to talk about issues, being a second grade teacher or being a fifth grade teacher or bringing all the science teachers together from middle school and high school. Those have been great experiences for teachers, great experience for me to sit and to be able to listen to what the issues really are in a classroom today.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Hutton, go ahead and have a drink of water.
Thank you. I don't know why I turned you. I knew you were going to ask me a question.
Is there a discernible pattern?
I think.
How do you go about building a team approach with your board?
That's an excellent question. The superintendent-school board relationship is paramount to the success of a school district. It almost becomes a marriage between the superintendent and the board, I think. And I think the key to the good relationship and the good team is communications. It has to be ongoing. It has to be sustained. There's no such thing as over-communicating to a school board or to the superintendent. It's got to be two-way. And I assume your probably current leadership, every Friday you get a stack of material, maybe color-coded paper that the hot pink is something you got to read right now, and the things that are on the white paper, read when you want to go to sleep some night. Internet has really helped of providing information to board members right away. If it's a hot item, something that's happened to a student or bus accident, then board members get a telephone call immediately. We even tried to improve on that and gave those digital pagers with a display that my secretary would type the information But board members came back and said, you know, it was a good idea, we all thought it was gonna work, but I'd leave this thing on my dresser, or else I'd leave it in the car, and it was an expense that we really didn't need. Probably the best type communication is the telephone or the email. But the team has to meet regularly, and MASB and Carl's group do an excellent job. I've been involved in, I guess when I first came, the superintendent board team workshop that they put together, and I got a lot out of it. My board members that were with me got a lot out of it. I like to have a retreat or workshop several times a year where we get to talk about things. I believe in strategic planning. There's got to be goal setting. Those are all integral to a good team. We've got to establish benchmarks on how we're going to measure the effectiveness of the team and what's going on in the school district. There's got to be accountability built in. I like to send a lot of information and even provide you with books. Provided our school board members with Jim Collins' Good to Great. And board members said, gee, that was really interesting. You know, though it's about business, it sure parallels what's going on in public education today. We don't face the brutal facts. We kind of pussyfoot around things, hoping it'll all go away. And in our district, we're trying to look at the brutal facts as how they relate to youngsters and effective classroom instruction and improving what goes on in our customer service.
Thank you.
Dr. Hutton, describe a situation in which you came with a proposal to your board or supervisor that you were very high on that was rejected. Describe what you did in the situation and why.
Well, after being in Indiana, where you don't vote on school facilities, on remodeling. In Indiana, I just went to the board one night and said, look, you know, these buildings were built in the 40s and 50s. We got to get ready for the 21st century. How about letting me hire an architect to do a feasibility study? Dave, that's a good idea. Go do it. Well, tried the same thing here in Michigan and didn't have the experience of the referendum and all the things that go along with selling a bond to the community, though I learned very, very quickly. We did hire an architect to do the feasibility study, and the direction to the architect was, let's bring every one of these 22 schools up to the 21st century, put the infrastructure in for technology, and see what we come up with. It was $187 million for Bay City. Well, the media grabbed onto that. That was headlines in the newspaper the next day. And people just came unglued. You know, the local coffee shop talk was, you know, first of all, this new superintendent's nuts to think we're ever going to spend $187 million. But it was only, they could have done it for 4 mills in Bay City and have quality learning environments. But when you talk to people one-on-one, they've remodeled their homes, they're in air conditioning, they've got nice carpeting, you know, but kids are different. I heard when we had our meetings up there, well, I had high school in this room, nothing wrong with green walls, you know, floor tiles, whether they're asbestos or not. I survived. My kids will survive. And, you know, I really started listening to what people were saying. After we just announced what we were doing, I started talking to the board, and they got really nervous. They didn't want to tackle a project that size. And I felt it was really important, because I have the passion for, we need to be doing what's right for kids. I scale it back. It went from over the 100 million down to 48, and that was defeated. As I said, the election was a couple of days after 9/11, and that Sunday night prior to what happened, there were about 50 of us went and did the phone bank. We called all the people on the voter registration list that we could get on a Sunday night, And at the time, the majority of people said, you know, you've scaled back, yeah, I could live with that, I'll vote for it. But then after the whole issue of 9/11, it went down 4-1. So we've gone back and we're creative now, you know, with the sinking fund, we're trying to establish that. I used a non-voted bond to remodel 2 elementary schools, though I was highly criticized on that from several of our union groups, because they said I took money out of their pot of money for salaries. But again, you've got to be a risk taker in this business today, and though sometimes you get disappointed, you dust yourself off and come up with another idea to move forward. And that's always been my philosophy.
Being a superintendent, you're aware that, cognizant of the fact that you are the leader of the school district. And as such, leading through the vision and the values of the district is imperative. Have you ever been in a situation in which you had to redirect the activities of others, whether it's staff or administrators, to be in accord with the district's vision and values, and how did you go about doing that?
I think when and this started all in Indiana, maybe this was because of my background in science and biology and chemistry, I've always been able to deal with mental models. You know, whether it's the Krebs cycle or photosynthesis or whatever it happens to be, I always had a visual picture of what's going on in a plant or in the chemical in the beaker. And to me it was easy to talk about vision because I could always envision, you know, I could design a school, it's glass, I'm looking inside, I see the neat things that are going on. When I became an administrator and tried to translate that to other people, I was amazed. A lot of people can't do that. Educators are very concrete, sequential, and I guess I'm probably the random abstract type guy that likes to think outside the box. That has been difficult for me because I've had to, you know, really take people and lead them by the hand to think about what is the best imaginable for kids or for a community. And today, it's not a superintendent of schools. To me, it's a superintendent of education for a community. Because so many things are going to change. You know, adult education is going to come back at us, and I think it's going to storm back at us because, you know, the graying of America, people want to do things. And to me, it's logical that schools are the niche to provide that. Now, how we fund all that, I'm not sure yet. I'm trying to think on a good way of getting more people involved in the schools, whether it's pay-as-you-go or whatever. But the visioning has been one thing. Behavior of some staff. As a principal, I had to talk to people about, I guess, ethics on how they deal with one another, how they deal with kids. Sometimes we're not very good to one another as people in the human relations side. I guess I've diplomatically done some in-service activities with staff to get them to, you know, everybody laughs when you do the role-playing of some silly things, but, you know, sometimes you have to do that and the aha goes on. And, you mean there are people in this building that are doing something like that? And, yeah. So it gets people talking. Superintendents and administrators today are models. We've got a model appropriate behavior for the district, for our buildings, board members the same way. I can think of a situation where I had a board member at one time that was breaking the election law. And I had to call him in and say, this is against the law. You can't do this. And he thanked me politely and went on. But sometimes you have to sit people down one-on-one and tell them the brutal facts, as Colin says. Probably the most significant thing, I think, for a superintendent is to be a model, to have above-board character, ethics, be visible in the community, whether it's Rotary or other service groups. United Way, I believe in being active in the community, to seek out partnerships. That's a whole new ballgame I've tried to encourage my administrators to be involved in, is partnering, getting a business to adopt a school. I'm fortunate in Bay City that S.C. Johnson has moved in, and of course, they're building in leaps and bounds. And they're such a family/community organization that they have just really been wonderful to us, coming in and doing different programs for us. And I think the resources in your community with MSU here and Lansing, there's probably all kinds of things you can do to encourage cooperation and sharing, and that everybody benefits.
Dr. Hutton, to a large measure, I think you've already answered this question, but you might want to pull it together, maybe add something to it. Describe your experience in new construction, renovation, and building maintenance.
Okay. My dissertation was on school facilities, and that I really enjoyed that, because I didn't know much about how schools were built, other than I knew I taught in an egg crate, and I was never really sure if that was effective teaching biology, because I was one that they had tables nailed to the floor, those old blacktop benches, that they had, and I pulled them up and moved them around so I could teach more effectively and put kids in groups and lecture to them in large group and do different things. Architects are starting to change, I think, for the good of redesigning and designing new facilities that are appropriate for schools of the future. There are really some neat facilities around this country, elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools, where kids, have to be put in a situation where the environment really invites them to learn. And, small group, large group, great media centers where there's access to technology. The same thing for staff members. Staff members ought to have their own office space where they can go and do research and collect data. Curb appeal, and when I was driving around before I came here, that's the first thing I noticed. What do the buildings look like from the outside? I'm a patron going to move into your community. What do they look like? Is it nice, the grass mowed, the building got a fresh look to it, playground equipment up to date, modern? You got to look at those things, and curb appeal is important. The maintenance of the facilities, clearly. I mean, as I said, the 80% that comes into your buildings probably comes to the high school auditorium, or the pool, or places where there are community events, and you got to maintain them correctly. You can't have chairs in your auditorium that are, have holes in the arms and this kind of stuff. And it becomes difficult for a board and the superintendent, because in the past we've always looked at maintenance and a budget as something we could always cut, and we kept pushing it to the back and pushing it to the back, and after 10, 20 years you got a mess. And that's what's happened in Bay City. And it embarrassed me, Tom Watkins has been to Bay City several times, and I gave Tom the tour of Handy Middle School, and it's the old Handy High School if you're familiar with Bay City. And Tom came on a day that there was probably a 50-mile-an-hour wind off the bay and pouring rain, and we're up on the 3rd floor, and he walked in one of the classrooms, and there was actually water blowing into the classroom from around the windows. And I happened to be at another meeting where Tom was making a presentation, and he was using Bay City as an example of what we've got to do to improve facilities in the state of Michigan. It's just, we're trying to do that. We're trying to be creative with the sinking fund and all the other things, but you got to maintain buildings. Your staff have to be in an environment that's conducive to teaching kids. And we have kids on the floor. We've got still asbestos in these facilities. Radon is another issue. And of course the feds keep piling on more and more things, the lead in the pipes. And as I understand it now, you can have lead in a system in houses away from the school. And if it flows through the school, then you've got to bring your school up to the lead code of emission, which I didn't know. So that's a whole other thing that's probably waiting in the wings for us to deal with. But you gotta have good facilities.
Dr. Hutton, I think your notebook might be on your microphone.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just for the recording. As you know, a superintendent must be an accomplished communicator. What do you believe your strengths are in this area?
Well, I think I'm a very effective communicator, but I'm also a good two-way communicator. I listen very intently to what people say. In some cases, I've been criticized for that. I've had a couple of patrons come in, you know, jumping up and down over issues with the high school. And they said they told board members afterward I didn't really react. And, you know, I explained, well, I was listening, you know, to get the facts as they perceived them. And then, of course, I was going to gather information to report back to them. But they felt right away I should have agreed with them, pounded on the table, and said, by gosh, we're going to get that corrected, and heads are going to roll, et cetera, et cetera. I had a difficult situation when I first went to Bay City, where I had two middle school teachers get in a fist fight in front of kids. And my position on what happened was very clear, that we were not going to stand for this. It was unprofessional conduct, and I moved for termination. And I guess it amazed me that we had factions of people that felt there's nothing wrong with that. That was just two people, two adults that got in an argument. It should have nothing to do with the kids, though they were there. But to me, as I said, we're role models, and we don't put up with behavior like that. And I had to do a lot of communicating on that. But the media, the local editor came out with a nice editorial supporting me in what we had done. And though the process took us almost 5 years to terminate the employees, it was justified. But I think you have to do the communications on an ongoing basis. It can't be the hit and miss. I believe in the concept of key communicators, where you identify people in your organization as well as in the community, and you send out regular information to them. Email's great on something like that because you can do your listserv, and because sometimes, you know, if there's a bus accident where your band's down in North Carolina playing, well, by the time that gets back to the community, you know, you have kids that are in the hospital, you have all kinds of stories. If you can have key communicators out in your community that say, no, that's not right. That didn't happen. And any community should have that. I think that, to me, should be part of a superintendent's little toolkit, that you have key communicators. And I think board members ought to have key communicators that they talk to on a regular basis. Because, you know, you go to Kroger, you go to the supermarket, and sometimes the stuff I hear is unbelievable. People love to add to the stories.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Hutton, can you, I'm sure you've dealt with difficult parents before. Have you dealt with parents, or can you give us an example of some difficult parents that you did deal with who had a valid complaint against the district or an administrative person, and how'd you handle that?
I had a Jewish parent come to me regarding the calendar and how we listed Christmas and Easter. It was a valid concern. Since I've been there, and I guess I was amazed going to Bay City, being a multicultural community, that we really weren't addressing multiculturalism. And we now have dealt with that. We have a great committee with community members and staff members on it. We do celebrate diversity, and we should celebrate diversity. And I think that parent had a legitimate gripe. The embarrassing thing to me was after we had this straightened out with the parent, and she was very supportive that I was going to take care of it, we had a change in administration at one of our elementary schools, and the new principal came in, had been small community. So guess what the principal did when they put out the fall calendar? Listed Christmas vacation, and the parent's child was in that building. So needless to say, I got a hot telephone call, but, you know, I explained what happened. And she was very nice. And we've tried to make sure that we cover the whole spectrum of diversity and multiculturalism.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
You've mentioned a couple times in your previous answers regarding strategic planning or long-range plans. Could you take a sort of describe the steps that you would use or have used for district strategic plans, both long and short?
Sure. I guess I've been involved. I got involved in TQM in Indiana. I was involved in doing an evaluation at Columbus, Indiana, on their high school, Columbus North. And I went down there, and I guess since Cummins Engine kind of runs Columbus, Indiana, their board was mostly Cummins executives. And they were very interested in process management, Kaizen, total quality. And I guess I started really thinking about process and systemic change, how it all occurs. And I came back and started going to some workshops on strategic planning. And in fact, this guy that is one of the Kaizen guys in Columbus, who does this training around the country, came and talked to our administrators and really did a nice job of getting administrators to start looking at, how do you move a school from point A to point B? Do you look at the end results? And everybody's saying, yeah, you look at the results and how good your kids are testing. And then he started saying, what about the process of getting from point A to point B? All the stuff that's in between. And you could see people kind of lean back and say, I've never thought about that. You get the type of kids, you got demographics, you got the learning environments, you got the textbooks we provide. You got all this stuff. What do? Well, we look at the textbook and we hope that the tests came out pretty good, and we give a standardized test at the end of the year, and if the kids did well, that's okay, we check the box off and move to the next class. So we started in Lebanon looking at the process. And with ITI, that to me was a nice model to look at, because there are benchmarks all over the place. And then people started looking at benchmarking, which is part of total quality, and to look at outcomes, but to also look at the process of how you get there. And I've brought some of that to Bay City, but with all of the issues that we were dealing the last couple of years in Bay City, it's kind of fell behind a little bit. But I did get people to start looking at performance management, which is still total quality and process. And I guess I started to rethink it, because board members said, Dave, you're doing so much stuff in this school district. We don't know what's going on in some areas. Tell us more about stuff. And I thought, I send people a packet like this every Friday about all these issues, whether it's curriculum, whether it's facility, technology, and people don't have the time. I mean, time is of the essence for everybody. Everybody has families, they're trying to do things. So I hooked up with a GM guy, and he has designed some software that GM uses called Performance Management Tracking. It's just a spreadsheet, but it takes all the goals and objectives in the school district, aligns them under instruction, facilities, personnel issues. I can't think what the other one is now. But anyway, we started off as a pilot to identify certain things. And in personnel, we started looking at attendance. And it was scary what we started to uncover. The people that were taking off Fridays and Mondays in certain departments, the number of sick days that were utilized, business days, et cetera, and we started collecting this data. And for management side, naturally, it was starting, we started putting the numbers to it and what it was costing the district. And we started doing the same thing in curriculum. We started with one topic, one subject, and I think it was the MLPP and literacy and how effective we were and how it was implemented and the tests and, the issue that came out of that curriculum and looking at it was the fact we were expecting people to do all this testing and there wasn't enough time in the day to do everything else. People were overloaded. Our facilities, cleanliness came across loud and clear when we started identifying that goal and objective. Some of our buildings were filthy. Our locker rooms for athletics were just really bad. We had showers that were leaking 24 hours a day. There was a cost there. So it was data collection. And the nice thing about a good strategic plan is you get all this data and then you can do something about it. But you got to be able to track it because there's just too much of it. And you got to make sure that key administrators are also tracking it. When I first started talking about this stuff, people, they kind of smiled at me and said, we've done strategic plans and I've got the strategic plan that we did here 15 years ago. And they'd wave it, show. But that's typical in a lot of schools around the country. Everybody does a nice document in a spiral notebook, and it's down in the bottom drawer. And when you talk about vision and mission and strategic plan, they pull it out and say, oh yeah, we do this. But it's not a living, breathing document. And if you're really interested in strategic planning with the benchmark, it's got to be revisited on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis in order for it to be effective.
Oh, yeah, I had a follow-up, but I think you just answered that as far as the evaluation, so you've covered that already, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Hutton, could you provide us with an example of a collaborative relationship that you've built with the community for the school district?
Sure. Chamber of Commerce. When I first went to Bay City, I went to the chamber president and said, in Indiana, they invited me to be a chamber member. And I feel it's extremely important that there be educators on the chamber board. And Mike said to me, there's never been an educator on the board up here. It's something we never even thought about. So after that, we had a change in the chamber president, and I was the first superintendent on the chamber board up there. We're rotating it through the area with the other area superintendents. I have been appointed to economic development up there. I'm on that board. I think it's extremely important. As I said, it's the superintendent of education for a community. And, these guys, when they started talking about growth in Bay County, it's growing, which is nice. There's always the business that'll come in if there's TIFAs, and then they say, well, there's no impact on schools if we give them the tax break. There's a big impact on schools with tax breaks and taxes. And in the past, some of those folks didn't want educators sitting on economic development and on chamber boards because we'd always say, let's really look at this issue and see how it does affect schools and how it does affect the business that's moving in. And again, we provide the quality workforce for a lot of these small manufacturing businesses. And we've got to have a quality product. The big thing in Bay County when we started analyzing our graduates, a lot of the good kids go to MSU and away to Michigan and they never come back. And SC Johnson and Dow and the big companies up there saying, we want people to stay in this community. This is the asset to a growing, viable community. And it's something you need to look at. So I have always sought out partnerships wherever I have been. I think that's one of the superintendent's jobs. It's very important.
Thank you.
Dr. Hutton, talk about what you would do the first 100 days on the job and what would you like to accomplish?
You know, the first 100 days you have to do a lot of listening. Back to the communications issue. The nice thing about a district this size is that you can get to talk to everybody and know everybody's name. When I'm in a sweatshirt and jeans and go to Myers in a district where there are 1,200 employees and 10,000 kids, people come up and talk to me. Now, they look familiar, but I don't know their names. I mean, if they're an instructional assistant at one of the elementary schools, you know, you do your visits a couple times a month, but you don't get to learn the people. The nice thing about a district this size in Lebanon, Indiana, I knew everybody. I knew their kids, and I like that. So the first 100 days, it'd be get to know the people. I'd like to know how they feel about the school district, what they feel their opportunities are, what are some things that could be improved. I like to get input from people. In fact, I probably would do a questionnaire and have people fill it out just to see how they feel, to get a good pulse of the profile of the school district. I like to do a lot of digging. I mean, I've read the Standard & Poor's report of your school district, and it's very positive, as you know. Look at the North Central reports. Visit community leaders, the mayor, be one of the first ones, local legislators, ministerial association, minority groups. Really reach out and go on their turf. You know, don't have the thing where you invite them here, because I have found they don't like to do that. I don't know whether there's something about the school that it makes them uncomfortable, but if you go to their turf and talk about the issues, you get a lot of information back. And I think first 100 days for me is a lot of data collection, visiting classrooms. I'd like to know what the accomplishments were in the school district in the last year, and what people really believe about the future. You know, everybody is really worried about the money and about the world situation. It's nice to hear what people's concerns are, and then talk about the positive things in the school district. We don't toot our horn enough. We've got to get the good word out. It should be a constant, I don't like to use the term bombardment, but I guess that's what it is. I mean, really beat people about the ears that every time they hear the term Hazlet Public Schools, everybody says, oh yeah, they do such great things over there. They got such great teachers. They got a great school board. And they got a great superintendent.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, at this point, that kind of is going to end our questions for our questions, and give you a few minutes to step back and take a sigh of relief and
Okay.
collect your thoughts. And you can make us now take a few minutes, and then if you want to make a statement to the board about anything, or you can also ask us any questions.
Sure. Let me ask a couple questions. I guess the first question I would ask you as a group, how does the community perceive you as a school board?
Well, I've been the school board member that's been on it the longest, so I guess my long of tooth here is, would be my perception. Is it? We've changed over the years. When I first started 19 years ago, we weren't that cohesive of a board. That certainly, I believe, has changed. We have some relatively new board members now, and we have some that are, one that's retiring, and myself, like I say, I've been around for 19 years. I think we're perceived relatively well. We're on TV, I mean, so we don't get a lot of audience anymore, other than from staff or people that are presenting things to us. So we don't get a lot of feedback as far as calls in the evening about didn't pick Johnny's up at the bus stop or that kind of thing. We don't have those kind of situations here. So I believe we're relatively trusted by the fact that our bond issues have done real well over the years. If you've probably watched what's gone on, we've only lost one that I'm aware of, a technology one that was several years ago, and that was probably a bit of taking it for granted type thing here on our part, and we missed it. So, but I believe we're perceived as a good board. that is a good custodian of the money that the taxpayers are nice enough to provide for us. And fiscally, we're in good shape, so we're not all that bad as far as compared to some of our neighbors. For example, they get more ink than we do by their troubles. So yeah, I think our perception is good. I hope I'm not blinded by lack of calls, but I think our other board members would support that we've been good custodians and we're trusted.
I think you're on target. The people I talked to this morning, good school board, very good school board. How about, you asked me the question about the board superintendent relationship. What do you see as the ideal relationship between the superintendent and the school board?
Yeah, well, I think you used the word, it's a marriage. And we were open, we trust each other, we're accessible. Bob's not quite the techno, he doesn't use a lot of email, but, or has in the past, but we have that capability. But we're regularly informed, very open, immediately pass information, but we aren't inundated with it. I mean, we don't have to know every little thing, and we get, our postings are on the emails or web, so we can selectively look at what's going on in each school. So we are never over-committed with information, but it's open, it's honest, it's on time, and we're each treated with respect, and we're at the table, and if we disagree, it's done in a way that we learn from each other, and we move it before we agree on any course of action that we take. So I guess mine is, it is like a family, and while we have spats like a family, we trust each other, we're open with each other, and we talk to each other on a regular basis.
Great.
I don't.
I agree. I mean, we've had.
I mean, there's a very high level of competency from our superintendent, and we feel very confident when an issue is brought before us. It's been fully disclosed. There's a high trust level, which makes it a much easier and enjoyable relationship because there really isn't any confrontation whatsoever. And really, our superintendent is an extension of our outstanding staff. And Scott had mentioned so many positive benefits of this community. One is the level of education our children receive. And it's a very enjoyable relationship.
We've been blessed with only having long-term tenured superintendents, had 10 years, at least while I've been around, 10 years on the first superintendent and then 14 years for Bob. So we've been kind of blessed along that line as far as having that situation keep the stability of the board, stability of the leadership, administrative team. So we've been relatively, I don't know if lucky is the right word, but fortunate, yeah. That's been the end result.
Let me ask one final question. How do you define micromanagement?
How do you define it, did you say?
Yeah. How would you as a board member define micromanagement?
Well, since we don't do that here,
That's
that's kind of a word that.
You've answered the question.
It's not us.
That's all I wanted to hear.
Let's just say that, yeah, we all know what micromanagement is because we go to the MASB things and we hear about it all the time. And we sit there in total amazement that these other people would want to do it. Plus, we can go home and watch cable television and watch it right next door.
That's right.
Oh, I shouldn't have said that, that's on public television. But anyway, I won't answer that because it's not a word that we want to bring to the table.
Okay.
I'm not aware.
That's a great answer, too.
I'm not aware that we've ever been accused of it, and I don't intend to. We don't intend that we ever will.
That's not
If we
right.
have been, it's been a silent criticism because we haven't heard it.
Great. I guess my closing statement is just spending an hour before I came to the interview in the community, and I talked to several people. Very positive. What they say, it's a great place to live. It's a great place for kids to go to school and get educated. Then looking at the material that I got off the internet and through the Department of Education, you're certainly to be commended for what you've done in this school community, and it's obvious that you believe in excellence and you want your children to excel. And not all communities do support public education, unfortunately, and I really believe that I have the passion for what I do. I really believe in providing every opportunity for children today to excel. Life's becoming so tough, and there's going to be so many more obstacles, I think, in the future that we need to be doing what's right for kids. And I believe with my experiences in Indiana and in Bay City that I have an excellent toolkit to be able to lead a district like Hazlitt to even greater things than you've already accomplished. So I do thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
And I appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you.
We thank you, Dr. Hunt, for your interest in this position and your coming all this way. And we will finish our interviewing today, and then we'll make some further decisions, and we will be in touch with what will transpire after this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you.